Doing? Okay. Hello, 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 hello. Okay, I think it's working this time. Okay. All right. So welcome back. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about heart health, which is always a big thing, especially here in the United States. We know heart disease is basically the number one killer, but we need to figure out why, and then more importantly, is there, things we can do? What can we do about it? Right. Now the heart, it's broken up into essentially four chambers, right? You have your two atria, which are on top, and you have your two ventricles, and it's all conducted by different nodes. So it has its own electrical current that tells the atria to contract, and then the ventricles to contract, and then you have blood flowing through your body that way. So in some ways, it actually has its own nervous system to a degree in the fact that it's always constantly pumping. And but what affects it though is our autonomic nervous system. Now we talk about this all the time, right? We have our autonomic system. It's broken up into two parts, right? You have this sympathetic, your fight or flight, your emergency switch, so to speak, and then you have your parasympathetic, which is your rest, digest, and repair. And that is going to affect how the heart pumps, right? Like that's going to affect how fast or how much blood is getting flowed, and more importantly, where it's going to. So in a sympathetic dominant state, in that fight or flight, in that emergency response, in this, and this is also like a brilliant design, by the way. Like if we're running for our lives, or if we're doing something to survive, we want that blood going out to the muscles, away from digestion, away from the digestive tract, and out to our muscles so that we can move and survive another day here. So that's something that's really kind of important to understand. The issue comes is when we kind of get caught, or when that gets overworked, or when that's on, say, for too often. So like in this sympathetic state, the blood gets shunted away from digestion, away from creating stomach acid, away from the liver detoxifying, and more towards getting glucose out to be used by muscles. And the kidneys or the adrenals will we get the production of things like adrenaline. The bladder, it's going to contract, so we're not going to be um, worrying about urination at the time. The bronchioles are going to relax, so we can get more air in. Where the pupils are going to dilate, so we get more light in, so we can be more aware of our surroundings. All of these are actually brilliant, brilliant design. And what all this is going to do, it's also going to affect the heart rate, and how often the heart is pumping. So, like, if you're in a sympathetic state, if you're on watch, if you're trying to do something, is that going to affect your blood pressure? And the answer is, of course it is. Of course, it's going to affect your blood pressure. Now, if you just kind of go up to someone and say, like, hey, like, you ask someone, hey, like, what is normal? What is quote unquote normal blood pressure? You're more than likely going to get the answer, hey, it's 120 over 80, right? That's the number we've kind of all had, ingrained kind of into us. That's what it is. That's what it's got to be. But that's not necessarily the whole case. So, like, the way it kind of works now, it's like, oh, well, if you're, under 140 and 90, you're considered quote unquote pre-hypertensive. And if you're over 140 over 90, then you're considered hypertensive. As if kind of like everyone's the same and everyone's physiology is the same. So if you take, like, the 6-year-old girl and the guy who's 350 pounds and works at McDonald's, they're apparently supposed to have the same blood pressure and it's all good. And like, even if you think about that for like half a second, that's preposterous, essentially, at the end of the day. So, where did these numbers come from? So, if you don't know, there's a joint national committee that meets about every 10 years or so. And it'll include some doctors, it'll include some pharma reps, it'll include, some people maybe in the science space. and they meet together and they come up with what these recommendations are. In other words, like, what is your blood pressure supposed to be? So the last one they had was the Joint National Committee 8. But where you hear the 120 over 80, this was actually Joint National Committee 6, which is in 1997. And that's where they said everyone is 120 over 80. That is optimal. And everything over 140 over 90, no matter how old you are, your fitness level, your 140 over 90 is considered hypertension. And in 2004, when they met again, they actually lowered it to 115 over 75, and 120 over 80 was considered hypertensive, or pre-hypertensive, I should say. So isn't that kind of like insane if you think about it? Now, when they met again 10 years later in 2014, so at this rate, they probably should be meeting again within the next couple of years. If you're under 60 years old, they kind of relaxed it. If you're under 60, 140 over 90 is the top end, and anything under that is considered normal. But if you're over 60, then it's 150 over 90 is considered normal and below. But like, isn't that also kind of crazy? Because like, what if you're 59 and you turn 60 and you're 144 over 88? Do you become like it's crazy. Like, do you become hypertensive overnight? It's kind of wild. So again, like all things, like we have to realize that like these things have to be taken into consideration with the context of what else is kind of going on here. Um, so we really need to like understand how this is going on, why this is going on, and how this stuff changes. Now, there are these things called baroreceptors. Now, if you ever heard of a barometer that measures pressure, right? Baroreceptors do the same thing inside the body, and these have sensors that are connected to the brain. And this is how you can potentially change your blood pressure by either dilating or constricting blood vessels. So, the tighter the blood vessels get, blood pressure rises. The wider they get, the more they dilate, blood pressure is going to decrease. And we actually have receptors for that can change that in real time based on what's going on in the nervous system, based on surrounding stimuli. So it's not like I'm walking around all day and say my blood pressure right now is not going to be the same as when I'm playing a basketball game later tonight. That's obviously going to be higher. I'm going to be moving. So it's not it changes. It's not something that's static. How many of you have ever heard of something called white coat syndrome? When you go to the doctor, like um, your blood pressure rises. It's just because you're feeling nervous. It doesn't mean that you're hypertensive. It means that you're getting nervous, and that is a response that the body has in real time. So it's not that it's necessarily off. You have to do it within the context of all this other stuff going on. And if you're not, then we need to understand why. And the first thing to do with that is, again, to understand that blood pressure is intimately connected to our nervous system, and any sort of physical, chemical, or emotional stress is going to raise it. And if you're not looking at those stresses, if you're not understanding that, then it's going to be really hard to figure out what the root cause is. It can't just be fixed by taking a pressure medication and all of a sudden it comes down and now you're good. You don't even know why it was high in the first place. So if we have a nervous system that's firing, that's supposed to keep you alive under stress, we need to understand what is that stress that's flipping that switch, so to speak. So it's and I mean, so we need to understand that. Another thing we need to understand is, again, another link between the two. So um anyone who's taken like an anatomy class or anything of the like may have heard of the phrenic nerve. I remember learning in chiropractic school there was a um what is it? We learned a little pseudonym, not pseudonym, but little saying. It was C34, C3, C4, C5 keeps the diaphragm alive. They're what stimulates the diaphragm, which triggers the lungs to breathe. So if we're in a stress state, that's going to be firing a lot more than in a more calm state. And that's going to affect how our nervous system reacts. So the diaphragm, you have to remember, is essentially a pump. And when it contracts, it sucks down. So the lungs expand and it essentially pulls them down. And what that allows more air to come in, more air to come into the lungs to interface with the lungs and the blood in the alveoli to transfer oxygen. So with the more surface area available, it allows for more oxygen and carbon dioxide transfer to take place. So so it's pretty incredible. Like as it expands, you create more surface area and you allow for more oxygen to come into the blood and more carbon dioxide to be shuttled outward. So mastering that is really, really useful. If we are able to have mechanisms where we can dilate our blood vessels so that they're not constricted all the time, that's going to improve airflow. And that's also going to improve oxygenation to all the tissues in your body. And if we don't have enough oxygen, that's not good. That's why I talk about this so much when it comes to the breathwork course that I talk about all the time. Because if, for example, we're sleeping and we're not getting enough oxygen transfer while we're sleeping, while we're asleep, that's going to affect oxygen levels not only to all of our organs, but also the brain. So if we wonder why we're waking up with brain fog or sluggish or not really feeling well in the morning, it could be literally a lack of oxygen to the brain over time. So, if we're not getting that transfer, if the air is not coming in, if we're not filtering it through the nose like we should, because that's going to increase nitric oxide concentrations, which allow for the bronchioles and the lung passages to open up and allow more air again to get in to be transferred more efficiently. So it's really important to kind of keep that in mind as far as it goes with blood pressure. And remember, if your blood pressure is high, then we need to understand why. Is it something going on with the kidneys? Because the kidneys can also regulate blood pressure and it also regulates electrolyte balance in the body. So if electrolytes are off, that can affect how dilated or constricted blood vessels are as well. So if there's something going on in the kidneys, do we need to address that? Is there a physical, chemical, emotional stress that needs to be figured out so we can address that? Is there um, a misalignment or something going on in the spine that could be affecting how you breathe? Because if you think about it, if you were, hunched over like this, is that going to affect the amount of air that I can get into my lungs so that I can breathe properly? Is this another stress? Of course it is. So, every inch or so the head moves forward, that essentially doubles the weight of the head, or at least that our neck needs to hold in place there. So that's going to put a lot of stress on the neck, upper back, but also the low back. And now you're starting to see how some of this can all kind of be related here. So, and remember, there's tons of things when you're taking your blood pressure that can affect it, right? Like the time of day, the temperature of the room, if you've eaten anything or drank anything or have been smoking within the last hour, if you've had caffeine, whether your position, so sitting, your blood pressure is going to be different than standing, is going to be different than if you're lying down. If you have a full bladder versus you not, that's going to affect your blood pressure. So it's really hard to come to a place where we can be like, oh, this is the blood pressure you need to have right now, when literally anything you do can be a variable for it. And it shouldn't be much about the number if we're not talking about the context overall and figuring out why. Now, something you can do, which might be useful for you, is learning what your pulse pressure number is. So this is essentially the difference between the systolic, which is the top number, and the diastolic, which is the low number. And ideally, you're looking for one that's kind of close to 40. So 120 over 80, for example, would be 40. So your pulse pressure would be 40. 140 over 100 would also be 40. So so what that means is, again, 40 is generally close to normal. If we're above 40, the heart's kind of working a little bit overtime because the blood is not oxygenating the tissues efficiently. And that could be at the lungs, That could be lack of iron absorption and digestion, and that could come from a stressed out environment. Um, it could be any number of things. The point is, you try to find out why. If it's lower than that, it also means that the body could be under some sort of stress and is working harder to compensate. So there's plenty of reasons like why blood pressure could be high and or not, and there's also reasons why it can change. Simply, deep breathing, doing more conscious breathing, um, performing breath work can lower your blood pressure very quickly. Like right now, it could happen. Even if you're doing, for example, some version of box breathing where you're doing 4 seconds in, you hold, 4 seconds out, hold. If you repeat that for 3 to 5 minutes, you're going to lower your blood pressure, even if you've been, running up and down the stairs. It will help bring it back down to where it should be. Nasal breathing, we were just talking about earlier, your nose, the reason why nasal breathing is so important, well, there's multiple reasons. One of which is that it's supposed to be a filter. So your nose acts like a filter. So it helps trap certain pathogens that can happen through the nose, through the hair in the nose. It warms and humidifies air. So it makes the oxygen easier to extract once it gets into the lungs. And it also, like I mentioned, it is it creates nitric oxide. Now, we don't necessarily know all the reasons as to how, but what we do know is that nitric oxide is a blood vessel dilator and also a bronchial dilator. And what it can do is it helps, again, lower blood pressure. It helps increase oxygen absorption, but it's also antimicrobial in nature. So it has multiple ways that it can be of a great benefit. Now, other things that can potentially be issues when it comes to high blood pressure, there's going to be, a few medications that are usually prescribed, for high blood pressure. And these will be things like beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, diuretics. You might see cholesterol drugs like statins, and you're going to see calcium channel blockers. And you'll notice that, ironically, when you look at some of the side effects of some of these medications, they tend to eventually potentially cause some of the things that they're supposed to treat, which kind of sounds backwards, but when you look into it, it's kind of shocking. So, for example, if we're looking at calcium channel blockers, they could actually increase chances of heart failure, for example, which is an issue, obviously, if you have hypertension. Beta blockers, for example, um, they it inhibits your ability to oxygenate the blood and then the tissues and can actually lead to premature aging, right? So if you're getting less oxygen to tissues, those tissues are going to age at a faster rate and can also, again, lead to an earlier death from things like heart disease, which is crazy because that's what's supposed to be helping, but also things like diabetes and cancer. Diuretics, also, tend to, again, increase mortality rate. But if they're going to increase your mortality rate and but help get your blood pressure under control, you know, what is going on here? Like, is it just about a number, or are we trying to increase someone's, life expectancy and actually live a healthier life? So, you got to kind of keep that, in mind. And we talk so much, or you hear a lot, about genetics, like, oh, you'll have this gene or you have that, and you're predisposed to all these things. But the bottom line is there's epigenetics, which means, above genetics. And epigenetics essentially control, what genes get turned on and off. And many environmental factors will play a role in which genes, again, are turned on and off. Oof. So a lot of them include, again, a lot of these drugs that we just talked about, like cholesterol lowering drugs, antidepressants, beta blockers, diuretics, oral contraceptives, birth control can definitely do it. They limit and disrupt a lot of nutrient balances in the body. They deplete the body of nutrients. This is well known. And we also know that, listen, the medical field, like, is the third leading cause of death, at least here in the United States. So, the way we're treating this, we have to really kind of look at how we're doing this and how are we really going to, make a difference here. So, there's plenty of different things like we can do. There's plenty of things that are worth, looking at that we can really start, making some improvement, with here. One of which is obviously the environment. We got to, check our environments. What are the stressors that we're seeing or we're exposed to? Again, physical, chemical, or emotional. Is there any inflammation that's involved? So getting things like homocysteine or high sensitivity C-reactive protein. These are going to be really useful, markers that we can look for to see if there's any sort of chronic inflammation that we kind of need to take care of. Environmental things, of course, like tobacco not moving. That was a post I made today. That's kind of really important. The medications we talked about, also really, really important. Are there certain things that you might want to look for? Um, you know, if you're getting, say, some blood work done. So I always think, what apolipoprotein A and B, those are really worth looking at if you can get those on a blood marker. The size of those, the particle size, the particle number, I think is also really good to look at. So are the LDL particles, big and fluffy, or are they smaller? The smaller ones tend to cause a bit of an issue. So, looking at that is, pretty important to kind of take a look at. You would kind of want those larger, LDL particles. So that's something really important to look at. Um, Apolipoprotein B. So we actually talked about that. So, that's a marker that we can kind of look at to see, if there's a normal risk or a potential elevated risk for that. Um, what else? We got different environmental factors that are huge issues when it comes to heart health. So heavy metals, like lead, for example, cadmium. These are known to increase blood pressure, hypertension. So, is there an exposure to some of these? Those can lead to high blood pressure too. A lot of those drugs that we talked about, so things like diuretics, birth control for sure, they're going to affect mineral balances in the body. Minerals like potassium, which is really important for dilating blood vessels. So if we're running lower on potassium, they're going to get more constricted, and that's going to lead potentially to hypertension. So that can be an underlying cause. Usually, it's again from either medications or it's from low stomach acid, which again, a little tired. And it could be due to um, medications or birth control too, or proton pump inhibitors, stomach acid blockers. So one of the reasons the stomach is so acidic is because it helps us extract minerals from it. So a lot of minerals are absorbed in the stomach. So if we tend to be low on something like potassium or zinc or magnesium, that digestion process, a lot of it happens in the stomach. So if that area is not acidic enough, that can lead to some issues. Statins, again, they come with their own big level of side effects, again, including some nutrient issues, but also things like chronic fatigue, pain, uh, muscle pains, memory loss. You can lose lean muscle mass. You lose CoQ10, so coenzyme Q10, vitamin D, selenium, again, another one of those minerals we need, vitamin E, a very powerful antioxidant. These all get depleted with statins. So if we're not getting the statins we need, that's real, or the minerals we need. One of the reasons can be due to something like statin drugs, and that really needs to be taken seriously because we're programmed to be active beings here, and if we're getting exercise induced asthma or our energy levels aren't there, then we really need to take a step back and understand why not. Exercise is honestly probably one of the best things we have as far as it goes to keeping a healthy heart. You're talking about building new neurons. You're talking about building new uh, blood vessels, which is angiogenesis, and neurotransmitters, which affect your mood. Berries, again, are something that are super, super helpful. Now, all berries and all fruits, really in general, are going to be protective of the heart. Foods that are generally high in polyphenol content, again, like blackberries, blueberries, there's plenty of different fruits that can do that. That's really good. We know that the more fruits and vegetables we consume, the lower risk of all cause mortality and especially cardiovascular disease. So, increasing fruit and vegetable content, this doesn't need to be, super, super complicated, stuff here when we're talking about this. Again, potassium. We talk about, bananas all the time when it comes to potassium, but, plenty of leafy greens, avocados. There's plenty of foods that are rich in potassium that can be really helpful with this. So that's kind of really important. Magnesium, that's another one. So a lot of different nuts and seeds. But again, like if you're taking antacids or some sort of other stomach acid altering drug, that's going to affect your ability to absorb these. So that's going to be a big issue. But magnesium's a big one. So that's another one. If we're low on that, or if we're low on potassium, the hypertension, high blood pressure is a potential issue or something worth looking into if those nutrients are low. Zinc is another one, super powerful antioxidant, but again, helps maintain an optimal immune system. And if it's not, that's going to affect, again, not only blood pressure, but also cholesterol levels. So understanding that is really kind of important. Garlic is huge. Garlic's a known ACE inhibitor and a calcium channel blocker. So it's a natural one that you get the benefits without the negative side effects. It also can increase nitric oxide production, which can, again, dilate blood vessels, which allows blood pressure to again come down. So, like, it's crazy. It tastes good, and it just makes a world of a difference. And again, we talked about statins, but other antihypertensive drugs. Again, what do they deplete? Sodium, potassium, magnesium, B vitamins like folate and vitamin B6 and CoQ10 and zinc. Like all of these things are the more common nutrient deficiencies that we tend to see. And a lot of this stuff can just simply be, avoided if we're, again, increasing foods that are going to be mineral dense. So that's particularly like raw fruits and vegetables, particularly the vegetables. So like garlic, like celery, like cucumber. Pretty much all of them would do. Those raw foods will increase that mineral content. This is why I talk so much about, blending and raw foods and soups and salads. They're more easily digestible. So if there are some digestive issues, using those foods can be more healing in that space. So it's really important to kind of keep that in mind, when it comes to that. So at the end of the day, we're talking about when we're talking about making sure that our blood is healthy, our heart is working properly. We got to make sure that we're creating an environment for healthy blood too, right? So we got to get rid of the genetically modified foods, the processed foods, the dairy for sure, but ideally like minimal animal products, like that stuff. We need more of this cleansing type of stuff that can help clean the blood, things that can be really helpful for the kidneys. So red foods like red cabbage or radish or pomegranate or apples or cherries, tart cherries, all really, really great for kidneys and helping cleanse the blood. Vitamin C rich foods. So you have, your kiwis and your guava and your strawberries, and your citrus fruits. So all of these are going to be cleansing for the liver and again the kidneys, which again are responsible for cleaning the blood. Again, magnesium rich foods. We talked about those earlier. Making sure zinc is a huge one too. Again, largely found in like nuts and seeds, but you could also find it in certain leafy greens. So that's really useful. Vitamin K, really important, especially with vitamin D. And we know most folks are vitamin D deficient, especially this time of year. So if we can get outside, that's really, really helpful. Even in colder, cloudy days like today, 20, 30 minutes, really, really helpful. Our gut microbes are actually supposed to be able to convert K1 to K2. So having a healthy gut and digestive system is really important when you're talking about those conversions. So is that clean? Sometimes a probiotic can help, but is it getting to whatever the underlying causes as to why? I did a post yesterday, but glutathione, are we able to detoxify and clean the blood as well as possible? And some foods and herbs that are really helpful with glutathione production. You can check my post on IG yesterday for some of those. Things like milk thistle and garlic and onion. Really, really useful stuff. Turmeric. So all very useful for helping cleanse the blood and keeping that functioning as well as it could. So when I'm talking about keeping the lungs healthy, keeping the blood healthy, keeping the heart healthy, it all comes together. Are those cleansing pathways open? Are they working properly? And are we addressing any sort of deficiencies that are either caused by the environment, caused by lifestyle, caused by medications? And are we living essentially in line with nature so that the body can be intelligent like it is and heal the way it should? So that's what we got for today. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you're interested, you can check out again my ebook, Nature's Kitchen and Cabinet. I would check that out. I talk about all these different foods, superfoods, and stuff. They're all in my bio, or the link to the book is in my bio. All this stuff is there in more detail. And more importantly, it shows you, or at least my process on how to cook, how to build a meal. And I think that's ultimately, I hope very helpful for you guys. So if you could check that out, um, you could learn more about it. You could check out the breathwork course too if you want to talk about stimulating that to help using the breath to literally clean the blood and clean your things that way. So that's really helpful. If you would like to work with me, again, my doors are still open. So you could use the link in my bio somewhere. Um, and I have my scheduler there. So if you ever want to schedule a time with me, you can absolutely do that. So thank you for tuning in. Hope to see you guys soon. I'm working on some big things, especially when it comes to detoxification. That's going to be coming soon. So keep an eye out for that. And I can't wait to talk more about it. And until then, have a great day. I'll see you later. Bye. Okay.